Hi, and welcome back to Rolling Hills Soul Care Podcast. My name is Jazzy, and I'm here with Chuck. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, Jazzy. It's been a little while since we got together last.
It's been a hot minute, yeah. We took a bit of a break, kind of a soul care break ourselves, right? We had some logistics things, and made it hard for the team to responsibly put together a podcast.
No, there's a lot going on, and we did the responsible thing, I think, which is practice what we preach. So I appreciated that, and appreciated you being willing to lean into that. So
appreciate it all around. So now that we're back, today we're gonna be focusing on your blog post number 93, right?
Yep.
Okay, this one's called "Staying Connected to the Vine." I really love this post, so take it away.
We'll talk more after I read. So here's what I wrote. My dad loved roses. We had several rose bushes in the yard of the house where I grew up. He taught me how to carefully prune the branches so they would produce more roses, and how to remove non-productive branches so they didn't take away the nutrients from the rest of the rose bush. While I got fairly good at this, I remember one time when I accidentally cut a healthy branch that had a beautiful rose at the end of it. I was kind of hoping no one would notice. The roses still looked quite beautiful, even after I severed the branch from the rose bush. In my young mind, I wondered if my mistake might not be noticeable if I just kind of propped the branch up in the bush. But I had actually just learned a valuable biblical lesson, as well as a gardening lesson. And it comes from John 15:4. It says, "No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine." Pastor Bill talked about this recently during our teaching series on transformative practices when he spoke about a rule of life. Some of us are rule followers. I know many other people who don't like rules at all. But in this case, the word rule in Latin is a word used in the ancient Mediterranean world to sometimes refer to a trellis. And trellises are used to raise grapevines off the ground so they can experience health and grow a harvest of fruit while being less subject to rot or disease from being on the ground. In John 15:1, Jesus used an object lesson that the disciples would have been very familiar with. Grapevines. Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener." In verse 5 he adds, "I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Jesus is not talking about how to grow grapes, but he's using lessons from the vineyard to teach us a valuable life lesson. Jesus wants us to be fruitful in this world, and that requires us to remain connected to him. Just like the vine and the branches, we should be so close that it's hard to tell where one stops and the other starts. And to stay closely connected to Jesus, it's helpful to have a trellis or a rule to lift us up, guide us, and protect us so that we can bear spiritual fruit. The trellis acts as an organizing structure. And that's the idea behind the rule of life that Bill talked about. If we want to be serious about soul care and other transformative practices, we need to ask ourselves, how can I build in regular rhythms for prayer, fasting, Sabbath, solitude, scripture reading, being in community, generosity, service, and sharing Jesus with others? Bill offered examples from his own life and his own schedule, and some of these are best done daily. Others may be weekly, monthly, or seasonal practices. Some of you are already really good at this. Others may need some help to deepen these transformative practices. If so, it's not too late to begin. It's really easy to allow the distractions of this world to keep us from those things. Work hard to push those distractions aside. View this as a mission to strengthen your connection to the vine. Start with prayer and ask God to help you deepen these practices. If you're in a soul care group or a community group, or you have a couple of really good Christian friends, ask them to partner with you to make these transformative practices a bigger and more consistent part of your Christian lifestyle. And let's see what kind of fruit we can produce. And I ended with Romans 12:2, which says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will.
Thank you, Chuck. That this blog spoke to me a lot, partly because I had to get past the visual because I've destroyed quite a few roses myself. So I'm going to just say I relate to your whatever 12-year-old self that was. I still do it now, and I'm not going to talk about how old I am. But it struck me because we talk a lot in this podcast about these rhythms and, finding ways to fit them in and all the different things that they could be. We talk about all these different aspects of it. Something that I'm really good at is, I'm not saying I'm proud of this, but I'm really good at finding the super negative parts of things. And so, first of all, this isn't negative by any means, but I don't know where I was during Bill's sermon that week, but this was the first time that I had heard the comparison between the word rule and trellis, which I really love. And apologies to Bill for not hearing him say that in that sermon. I'm sure I was there. But anyway, I noticed the thing that I zeroed in on, because I can find these things, is where you said that, trellises are used to raise the grapevines off the ground so we can continue growing. But if they are down on the ground, they are now subject to rot and disease just from being on the ground. And that struck me because it's not like it's a threat. It's not like these are one-to-one analogies, but it is a truth that if we aren't focusing on climbing and leaning on and abiding with those rules and those trellises, those things that are maintaining us, we are just going to languish and sit there. So that was...
Yeah, well, two things that came to mind as you talked. One of them is sometimes I do, when I hear something in a message, it sparks an idea that I think, how can I carry that forward in a soul care blog? And part of the reason for that is there's just so much coming at us during a teaching that it's sometimes we miss something. So there's you missed that little bit.
So
which
you're giving
wasn't,
me an out.
I'm
not
you
here.
an out.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll take it.
And I think that happens to all of us. I've had many times where somebody will tell me about an aspect of the teaching, and that didn't strike me at all that way. I must have missed that while considering something else that I heard, because God speaks to us. We're all at different points. So anyway, it's not like you weren't paying attention. It just didn't strike you at that point. And yet, what you're as you focused on this, having some structure. And for some of us, that doesn't necessarily sound appealing.
Right.
But without it, we're not. God is not using the structure to make life harder for us. He's doing it to make life better for us and lift us off the ground. And that's a neat visual picture. And Jesus was teaching his disciples in a first century environment where this was very real, very clearly evident. If he came today, he might use slightly different examples for us. But this was one that they could get, and you just acknowledged it very nicely, where it has two aspects to it. It's designed to help us lift it up and bear more fruit. But if it's not there, bad things can happen.
Right. It's not just not fruit bearing. It can also drag you down further.
Right. Which I think most of us would say, I don't want that. It doesn't sound good. And really, I think about, we've got some tomato plants that just kind of decided they were going to be in places in our yard, and we let them grow. But in most of those cases, the tomatoes were laying on the ground, and it was really evident to me, well, you have two choices. You can just let the plant be as it is, and most of those tomatoes are not going to be usable. And instead, okay, let's lift them up and let them get off the ground and the dirt and the mud from rain or whatever. And just with a little bit of work, lifting them up, even though I didn't put them there, there's just an example of sometimes God puts things and causes them to grow in unexpected ways. But we got an amazing amount. These happen to be cherry tomatoes. We got an amazing amount of cherry tomatoes out of that plant. And part of that was just simply doing a little bit of work to get it up off the ground.
I love that you said just a little bit of work, just acknowledging that there's something there that needs to be paid attention to and, redirect it and look at what came out of that. That's a really cool idea.
And what's going on in my mind when I say just a little bit of work is I didn't make the tomato plant grow. I didn't even put it there.
But you recognized it and nurtured it, yes.
Yeah, I didn't make those tomatoes come out. God is doing all of that work, but I'm participating in it, and I'm doing my part, and that's a little bit of what's happening here. God is going to cause the growth to happen inside of me, but I can do my part in creating space or time or people to hold me accountable that visually lifts me off the ground and enables me to be much more healthy and much more like what God had in mind in the first place.
Well, I love that. I wish we had visuals over here so you could see like how much nodding and agreeing I'm doing. Yes. Yeah. You're speaking to me, Chuck. You're speaking to me. Okay, well, thank you again for sharing that with us. And if you would like to read more of Chuck's blog posts, all of these posts are available previous, and we're still producing, and I say we, Chuck is still producing more blog posts today. You can find all of these posts at rollinghills.org/worship. You can also follow RH Worship on Instagram. You can subscribe to the Rolling Hills podcast. You will find these podcasts and Sunday teachings there, and we will see you in a couple weeks.